love coffee, I love tea. I love the jabber jive and it loves me. Coffee and tea and the jabber and me. A cup, a cup, a cup.
This is Lisa Davis with another Catholic Momcast. In my last Momcast, which aired at the end of April 2023, I tried to paint a picture of the childhood memories we kids, now in our 50s, treasure of our country grandparents, and the lessons that can be learned from their idyllic lifestyle, or what we call idyllic in our day, that in their day was called normal. Which historic comparison begs the question, what is normal? 40 years ago and today, 1492, 1942, all the way back, I'd wager every set of parents throughout history, except maybe Adam and Eve, have contemplated this question regarding their family life. Moms in particular, I think, ponder for any number of reasons. Are we normal? More to the point, since the metrics of normalness change from age to age, what we actually want to know is how we measure up. If our homes measure up, if our children measure up, if we personally ourselves measure up. With few exceptions, we at least take notice of how we compare with others. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. It's the most natural thing in the world to liken ourselves to others, to make sure we're not goofing up somehow. You know how you look out the corner of your eye to make sure you're standing at the right time during High Mass? We gauge by others' success whether we're trying as hard as we should be. If the sisters can keep a whole class of first graders still and quiet during Mass, then I may or may not have an excuse for my one first grader singing the ABCs under the pew. By watching another family, we can sometimes learn about a variable missing in our family protocol. How exactly does that family of 14 corral all their children so efficiently into that van? We are watching others, of course we are. It's a normal instinct, and it can be a good thing, if we're measuring with the right yardstick and then applying what we learn appropriately. My two sets of grandparents, as I've mentioned, were as different as people could possibly be. If my mom's country parents were Currier and Ives, my dad's city parents were Punch and Judy. And to be honest, my own childhood home fell in the middle, somewhere in the suburbs. More hamburger helper than log cabin syrup, more Brady Bunch than Punch and Judy. And we loved both sets of grandparents equally. We noticed the differences between them, and we loved it. Vive la différence! While we could easily rhapsodize, though, about our country grandparents' peaceful life, our city grandparents' lifestyle would lend itself better to rapping. My dad's parents and his disabled brother, our Uncle Art, lived in a row house in downtown Baltimore, Maryland, smack dab in the middle of the action. And I do mean action. Downtown Baltimore, Maryland, it wasn't the crime center so much when we were children, but it was a bustling metropolis. Talk about a contrast to our North Carolina grandparents' quiet house in the woods. But let me tell you, the traffic and fire engines and busy cityness outside had nothing on my grandparents themselves. There was always something going on at their house, some news story to tell or good argument, lively debate, and the three of them were happy to have us come visit and join in or referee. It was great fun. So much talking, so many ideas juggled and rolled or thrown at the wall. In the summertime, a ball game played as background music, and card games on the big front porch would halt mid-play for everyone to watch the fire engines go by. My grandparents and uncle would come running out of the house to catch a glimpse of the engines when they passed. Speculations would be made about where and how big the fire was. Debate would ensue. The card games were occasionally resumed. Though the big furniture in our city grandparents' house dated back to the 1930s or earlier, my great-grandfather was a carpenter and had actually built some of it. Our city mom's kitchen was enthusiastically 1950s kitsch, original to the time. She was all about bright colors and kooky ephemera. If you looked out the window, you could see the pink flamingos, windmills, and little Dutch girls in her yard. She collected elephants and salt and pepper shakers and must have had thousands of them. My grandfather had a backwards clock on the wall and a collection of funny little gadgets to entertain us kids. During the holidays, candy or sugar cookies decorated the antique sideboard, and, best of all, Tupperware containers of lunch meats and cheeses and specialty mustards from the corner deli waited in the fridge. In the bread box, Mom stocked all sorts of fresh breads we never got at home: pumpernickel, rye, sourdough, no wonder bread for my grandmother. And there was always coffee, all day, every day. My grandmother made stout-hearted coffee so strong you could stand a spoon in it. My grandfather drank it black all day long, but starting so early in the morning we thought he never slept. At our bedtime, we'd leave him sitting at the table smoking cigarettes, reading the paper, and drinking coffee, or maybe the end of one Schlitz malt liquor beer that he nursed all afternoon. And then, no matter how early we got up, he'd be there in the morning with his coffee and newspaper. All that coffee would be bound to keep you awake. My mom never could get used to such a muscular brew. If you added a pitcher of cream to your cup, it didn't bat an eyelash. But even as a child, the idea of coffee you could stand a spoon in held the same attraction as the backward clock and the flamingos. Our city grandparents' row house was more alive and lively and caffeinated than anywhere else in our young experience. But with all that, and I share this with affectionate sadness, my city grandmother had the idea that we loved our country grandmother better, because she was pretty and quiet and gentle, and she had a refined little country house with refined manners. She actually told my brother and me this once when we visited her as teenagers, and we couldn't have been more shocked. Certainly, our country grandparents were very special to us, but they were apples to our city grandparents' candied orange slices. We first learned to play card games, gin rummy and war and pinochle, at Mom and Pappy's house, which incidentally were our names for our city grandparents. And we played word games there, Scrabble and Boggle especially. From our mom's people, we learned to love music, but it was from our dad's side of the family that we learned to love words, the power of them, the thrill of communicating, the embarrassment of not communicating well, the value of expression, and the importance of good debate. There was certainly deep thought and solid conviction in the undercurrent of our country grandparents' cozy home, but it was not as plainly out in the open. And when it was, we weren't, as children, really invited to join in. We sat around the fringes and listened, but there was an unspoken rule about our being more seen than heard at the dining room table at our more sedate grandparents' home. And not that we weren't cherished by our other grandparents, but it was from our city grandmother mostly that we learned that our view of life mattered. We were not just allowed, but expected to chime in on the conversation at the pinochle table. And it was there that we learned to think through our opinions as carefully as we tallied up meld and saved back trump cards. Our grandmother especially cared what we children thought about things, but if some incorrect turn of mind or factual error needed correcting, Mom spoke right up to set us straight, and just the same way our dad always did for us. We could goof around with Mom and Pappy. Silliness was openly encouraged, but foolishness was not. Neither of my city grandparents finished high school, but they were well-spoken and well-versed on current events, and they talked and talked and talked, not just to one another but to us. They had lived a hard life, full of troubles, the gist of which was not kept from us grandchildren. We knew they'd never had more than just enough money, for instance, to pay the bills, but they protected us from the seedier side of life the same way our country family did. In their own unique way, our city grandparents created an oasis, but their oasis had a figurative amusement park under the palm trees. We children absolutely loved our city grandmother, and we knew she loved us as no one else did. She was novel, unique, splendid. By some standards, she might not have been considered as, air quote, normal as our country grandmother, but normal is a relative thing, and we little relatives thought she was better than normal. To this day, it hurts my heart a little that she measured and found herself wanting. God love her, she fashioned her yardstick to be only as tall as her misconceived shortcomings, compared to someone she barely even knew. Haven't we all caught ourselves doing that? She allowed her joy in her family to be dimmed by comparisons made using a homemade yardstick held up against mist. Many years after having met her maker, my grandmother now knows about that yardstick, same as we'll all discover. The only one that matters is God's. No matter what else is going on in the world, no matter how well we do or do not measure up with the Joneses next door or the Smiths in the next pew, God sees and knows how we're measuring up, compared to what He knows we're capable of, which is, more often than not, I hate to tell you, more than we think we are capable of. We can take a hint about our own progress from the good example of those around us as regards spiritual things in particular. Reading the lives of the saints is one of the best ways to spur forward our own spiritual life. It's painful sometimes, but important to compare ourselves to those who have already won the crown. In point of fact, though, the only time it makes sense to compare ourselves to others is when we notice someone who's figured out a good way to grow toward heaven. We should want to get in on that. Besides the saints in heaven, there are also many wonderful examples in the next pew, so to speak. It's not a competition, mind you, though the devil may try to put that notion in our heads, but we can and should observe the good example of other Catholics and fine-tune their modus operandi to meet our own family's specs, so we can grow heavenward right along with them, and maybe even become encouragement for someone else in the pew who's also looking for guidance. Things proceeding as they ought, that soul grows in virtue and inspires another soul, who incorporates what he learns into good practices, and before you know it, the unself-conscious good Catholic life of one family has enlisted an army of good Catholics, every soldier with his or her own unique spin to the adventure. Every path to heaven, even of those who are trying to follow precisely in the footsteps of the saints, is going to look wildly different. How could it not? No matter how hard my city grandmother could have tried to copy my country grandmother, which, thank the good Lord, she did not, she would never have come close to being like my country grandmother. And if she had been exactly like our country grandmother, our family of communicators might never have happened, and the Catholic Family Podcast might not even exist. So you see, God, in His infinite wisdom, provides and expects every sort of family culture and a million different kinds of mothers and grandmothers with all sorts of backgrounds and personalities and ways of mothering that are all equally praiseworthy in the sight of God when they are doing their best to raise their home and families heavenward. It takes all kinds of people to make a world. Whether your family looks more like Punch and Judy, or Currier and Ives, or the Brady Bunch, we all have the same happy goal to make it a holy world. And a short addendum, a bit of prose and a prayer that segues nicely, written by John Henry Newman, who needs his own podcast. God, Cardinal Newman wrote, has created me to do Him some definite service. He has committed some work to me which He has not committed to another. I have my mission. I may never know it in this life, but I shall be told it in the next. I am a link in a chain, a bond of connection between persons. He has not created me for naught. I shall do good. I shall do His work. I shall be an angel of peace, a preacher of truth in my own place, while not intending it if I do, but keep His commandments. Therefore I will trust Him, whatever I am. I can never be thrown away. If I am in sickness, my sickness may serve Him. In perplexity, my perplexity may serve Him. If I am in sorrow, my sorrow may serve him. He does nothing in vain. He knows what he is about. He may take away my friends. He may throw me among strangers. He may make me feel desolate, make my spirit sink, hide my future from me. Still, he knows what he is about. And last but not least, the prayer of Cardinal Newman. May the Lord support us all the day long, till the shades lengthen and the evening comes, and the busy world is hushed, and the fever of life is over, and our work is done. Then in his mercy may he give us a safe lodging and holy rest, and peace at last. Amen.